Okay. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. You can sit up, Tom. It's just trying to herd this panel together, this very unruly big panel. I'm Gwen Robinson, past president of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand, and we're all here tonight to talk about some exceptional work that's actually on the walls. If you're watching by a video that we'll be posting next week, you can still come in and see these fabulous photos over right through April. So I'll get to that in a minute, but just wanted to highlight, I think a lot of people who are here tonight are here because they're interested in Myanmar or photography or both, and tattoos, of course. So for those with Myanmar interest, we do have a few more events coming up, including a very interesting night on April the 1st of short films about refugees along the Thai-Myanmar border and displaced people inside, and these are exceptional films, and it's on Monday, April the 1st. I really recommend that. We also, on the 29th of March, we'll have the annual general meeting of the Foreign Correspondents Club, and on April the 3rd, we've got Reporters Sans Frontières, an excellent group that champions free press and freedom of speech issues around the world, but particularly this region. We'll be giving an event, a press conference, and some thoughts on media freedom in the region on the afternoon of April the 3rd. So everyone's welcome to all these events. So just turning to our event tonight, which is primarily about chin facial tattoos and the insights of these two outstanding photographers, writers and experts. Just a very brief introduction. Jens Uwe Parkitny, over there on my far right, was born in Germany, and he's a background in commercial publishing, journalism and digital marketing. In fact, Jens is multifaceted. He was also a bit of a hotelier, a businessman. He's based both in Myanmar and Thailand, and he has many hats he can wear. So as a journalist, he's worked in countries around the world, particularly in Asia, where he's been here for the last 16 years and lived and worked in Hong Kong, Singapore, and of course Myanmar. And as you'll hear from him, since 1999 he's been travelling to the remotest parts of Myanmar to record some of the most fascinating aspects of the culture, and you're about to hear about one of those tonight. And right next to me is Tom Vata, who's something of a Renaissance man himself, with a real edge that hones in on tattoo culture as well as journalism, rock and roll, and rather dark thriller writing. He's a journalist, author and editor, working mainly in Asia, and also writes screenplays for documentaries, etc. So he's actually also authored one of the most interesting books on Thai tattoo culture, Sacred Skin. So to let you know, all these books are available for sale here tonight at a special price, and the authors are here, so if you do buy one, you can get them to sign. And also all these photographs are for sale as well, beautifully mounted on aluminium. But anyway, that's just to let you know that. And we'll hear from Jens first, and then Tom, and we'll take questions. So save your questions for shortly after the talk. So over to you, Jens.
Thank
you.
Gwen. I think I just need audio, I guess.
Yeah, can we have the microphone, Tom? Jens's microphone. Yep, it's working, apparently.
Is it working? Can you hear me? Okay,
yes.
good. Well, esteemed members of the FCCT and guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. It's actually a great honor. Thank you, Gwen, for the introduction. It's a great honor to have been invited to talk about my 14-year-long quest for these amazing chin women with traditional facial tattoos in Myanmar. Because one aspect of this intense and very bloody armed conflict that is raging right now in Myanmar is that it accelerates the loss, the cultural loss of certain practices and also traditions. It makes it also impossible to continue any documentation or conduct further research, not only those of the Chin, but also those of other ethnic minorities, which some of them transferring knowledge, still transferring knowledge only orally from generation to generation. But here's a disclaimer. I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not an ethnologist. However, the cultural record I was created over time has gained significant anthropological value. And more importantly, it's also a permanent record for those southern Chin groups that practiced facial tattooing in the past. I'm going to talk about my journey of discovery in Myanmar through all those years and share with you my discoveries. But I will not talk about the impact of this conflict on the communities and the places that I had the privilege to visit in peaceful times. So I set foot in Myanmar the first time in December 99. And like so many first-time visitors, I traveled from Yangon to Bagan and then to Mandalay, spent a few days at Inda Lake, and also spent a few days in Napali Beach. And I was absolutely captivated by the people I met, the experiences I made, and the landscapes I saw. In fact, I felt I connected with the country because the landscapes I saw somehow seemed to mirror my inner landscape in my hunger for authentic experiences and adventure. And this hunger for adventure was fueled in my childhood by my father, who told me stories about different continents and countries he traveled to when he was a young man and worked as a merchant sailor on a ship. I decided not to follow my father's footsteps, but to look for other options how to explore the world. So to cut a long story short, I became a travel trade writer. And between 1990 and 1997, I worked on journalistic assignments in 25 countries. And then, at some point, changed from writing for print media and started to create content for the online travel service Expedia that was launched by Microsoft in 1996. I actually ended up working 15 years for Expedia, first out of Germany and then later on based out of Hong Kong and then out of Singapore. And during that time, I traveled very frequently to Myanmar and sometimes went for a month or two in the wilderness of West Myanmar and into a world that was so different from the corporate world I was working in and living in for most part of the year. But it was not before January 2001 that I encountered a Chin woman with a facial tattoo. And she approached me in Kampala, a small town in Chin State, and I was about to trek Mount Victoria. It's the third highest mountain in Myanmar with about 10,700 feet. So it was the eve of the day, of the trekking day, and she approached me and wanted to sell me a clay pipe. And I looked at her face, and I saw a different expression of beauty, and I saw art. So I asked her if I can take her portrait, and she said yes. So we ended up smoking homegrown tobacco together out of the pipe. She wanted to sell me, and then eventually I bought it. And the next morning we've met. And I took her portrait, and what you see is the first portrait I took of a Chin woman with a facial tattoo. Her name is Xing Pang. And it was a defining moment because I decided that for the next 10 years, that's what I want to do, is to search for the last women, Chin women, with facial tattoos. And also, I looked for a reason, or I created a reason for myself to come back to Myanmar again and again. So, talking about the different ethnic groups in Myanmar, the Chin is one of officially 137 groups. The Myanmar government defined 8 major ethnic groups as national races. So apart from the Chin, that's the Kachin, the Kayah, the Kayin, the Mon, the Rakhine, the Shan, and the Bama. The term Chin is very misleading because it sounds very homogeneous, whereas in fact, it's the opposite. It's the most inhomogeneous group of ethnic people you can imagine. It consists of 53 different groups speaking 44 different languages and dialects. Yeah. In Myanmar, you have around 530,000 Chin living, and what you see on the map here in that rectangle with the disrupted lines, that is where you have Chin communities settled, not only in West Myanmar, but also in East Bangladesh and in northeast India. But only groups that settled in that, what I marked with that orange oval, is a very confined space in southern Chin state and in adjacent regions, such as parts of Rakhine and Makwe division. You find groups that in the past practiced facial tattooing. Why that is the case? Why Chin groups that live in Bangladesh or northeast India or even in North Chin state have not practiced any facial tattooing defies any scientific explanation. We don't know. Chin state made headlines shortly after the coup in June 2021. On CNN appeared an article describing how the local community in southern Chin state, in Mindat, it's also a township, took up arms to protect their own, and what they used to fight against the military was their traditional hunting rifles. That's how they started to fight back. The article also describes the very tragic impact of the conflict on those communities. This is the Polaroid I took in 2002. It shows 2 Chin men with their traditional hunting rifles. So the British Empire granted the Chins the right to bear these rifles, to hunt bears and tigers and deers during colonial times. And the Chin remanufactured these hunting rifles, calling Tumi rifles, and you find them in every household, still today. What the article does not mention is that in southern Chin state, in Mindat and in surrounding villages, you still find a lot of women with traditional facial tattoos. Also, a lot of young women, like this one. She was in the end of teens, early 20s, and that's quite remarkable because the Revolutionary Council of the Union in Myanmar, the governing body that governed Burma between 1962 and 1974 under General Ne Win, banned facial tattooing, officially on the reason of health concerns. And tattooists that performed their occupation, even still in the 90s, when they were caught, they were severely punished and ended up in prison. So it was quite remarkable to see still very young women bearing these tattoos in the past. I talk about the Highland Chin first. These are Chin groups that settled in the southern Chin Hills, in the south of Chin State. I later on talk about a group that settles on the plains in Makwe division, and later on groups that settle along the Lemyu River in Rakhine. It's a very geographic distinction I came up with because I realized that each of these geographic regions have different groups with very distinguished tattoo patterns, and I'm going to show you some of them. So let's start with the Highland Chin here. So traveling to Chin State, I flew to Yangon, then to Bagan, and then hired basically a car and a driver and a guide. And it was a 9 to 11 hour overland drive at the time to go to southern Chin State to Mindat. And after the rainy season, it was very difficult because sometimes there were no road. There were these ad hoc streams that formed, and the road just ended at a stream, and you couldn't see any road on the other side. The best you could do it then was following the ox cart, because they knew best way to do the crossing. It was part of the fun, I have to say that. I enjoyed it tremendously. And then approaching Chin State, there was only one road that winded up, the mountains. And the deeper you got into Chin State, the more beautiful it actually became. Especially around Mount Victoria. This is a shot where you see a 100-year-old rhododendron tree with these red rhododendron blossoms. It's a national park now, very unique flora and fauna. It was actually rewarded with Asian Heritage Park status. And along the edge of the park, you have villages where you find these amazing Chin women, and some of their traditional attire actually mirrors the beauty of these red rhododendron blossoms. And the rhododendron blossom is also officially the national flower of Chin State. You don't see a lot here in terms of tattoo pattern. You might see a few vertical lines. And I spent quite some time with a graphic designer from Hong Kong to create these illustrations, front view and side view, from the tattoo patterns I saw, because I wanted to show the beauty of them, but also the different patterns. And some of the women were quite old, so if you just look at a photo, you couldn't really recognize the pattern immediately. That is a different group. So the first group is called Yindu Dai. This is a different group called Yachin, and the pattern seems almost similar, but it has variations because it's disrupted vertical lines and also dotted lines. But also here you see the red color, and nice to see is the matching bracelet and the necklace to the headdress. And this woman didn't put it up for me. That's how she dressed every day. This is the pattern for this group. So certain groups have their own signature. And here's another one. You saw that pattern on the first girl I showed you, the first young Chin girl. That is a Munchin woman, and there were still a lot of elderly women, and they all loved to smoke their chirruts. And what I did in order to create these black and white shots, I neutralized the background. I basically took a white bed linen because I don't want anything in the background to distract the viewer from looking straight into the face of these women to see the beauty and the dignity of their facial tattoos. That is the pattern. So these patterns have never been deciphered. Nobody knows actually what these symbols stand for or what they mean. No living tattooist of the Chin, nor the Chin women themselves. There's no experts outside of Myanmar. There's no expert outside in Myanmar or outside of Myanmar. There's no one. It's really, it's never been researched. That's a different group, also in the Mindat area. And the longer you look into the face, you might start to see some pattern. So you see double vertical and horizontal lines. You might see a circle on the cheek. And I'll make it easy for you. This is how the signature of this group looks. Another group is called Chin Moye. You can't hardly see the pattern here. It's a bit difficult. But this is exactly why I created these illustrations. So these are basically squares filled with dots. So the southern Chin Hills, except for one group, they use mainly dots in vertical, horizontal double lines to create these patterns. And a woman that is born into a group cannot choose a pattern as she like. Yeah? She's born into a group that owned a pattern for many centuries. And this is then the pattern that was applied on her face. These patterns were typically applied during pre-puberty and puberty. So most women I've met, and I met about 120, were tattooed between the age of 9 to 13 years old. In some of the groups, they allowed their young women to do it in stages, like this group. So it really depended on the threshold of each woman, when to stop. Some were able to complete it in one session, took hours. Some completed it over a course of 2 to 3 years with, 8 to 10 sessions. It really depended on the threshold of women. Other groups, and I will show you that later, they didn't provide any choice. So you had to, as a young woman, you had to sit it through. Everything was done in one session. That is a very rare portrait because I've met never anyone who's seen it or took a photo or was able to take a photo. It's also a southern Chin woman from Matubi, that's a township in southern Chin state. And it looked like freckles, but it's actually tattooed. It's all dots. So key question is, how do they do it? What do they use as tattoo implement, and how did they create the ink? So as tattoo implement, most groups use rattan thorns that they bind together, like 3 or 4 rattan thorns. That's the implement. And for ink, they scrape soot from oil lamps or from pots where they burn lard. They put inverted top up on pot with a hole, smoke goes out, they scrape the soot, mix it with water, and add the sap of this climbing shrub. Took me a while to identify it, and I haven't peer validated it with a botanist, but I'm 99% sure it's Vincetoxicum indicum, which is a very common shrub, climbing shrub that can be found in South Asia and Southeast Asia. So altogether, I found about 7 patterns in the southern Chin Hills, different patterns. What I didn't show you yet is the one down here on the right, which is a completely blackened face. Completely black, no pattern. And the reason is because the majority of this group actually settled in what I call the plains, in Magwe division, and that is plains, not mountainous. I call them the plain Chin. And the plain Chin settle around Sedodia. Sedodia is one of the oldest towns in Myanmar, oldest settlements. It was founded in 1100. It is a town with township level, means 120 villages are under the government of that town, Sedodia. And it was very, very difficult to get permission to go there. Actually, all of the places I visited, you needed permission. You couldn't just waltz in and say, hey, I'm going to go here. That was not impossible. It was impossible. But this was particularly difficult because in that area you had weapons manufacturing factories run by the military. So they didn't want to see any foreigner around there. But I was lucky because I had a friend whose friend had a brother who worked at the Ministry of Forestry at the time, and he vouched for me, and he basically got me in. But even when I went there and met officials, they didn't want me there. It was very difficult, and I had a shadow for 3 days. They were following me every step. And after 3 days, they realized, and I mean, this was the special police. After 3 days, they realized I'm mostly harmless, so I could start to visit the villages. And on the way to these villages, you saw these old, pagoda relicts or stupa relicts, which was really quite picturesque. Going from Yangon to Sedodia at the time was also quite interesting because you couldn't hardly see any cars on the street. This is in Bago region, 11 o'clock in the morning, no cars. You see motorcyclists. And you did see more water buffaloes at the time than cars. Yeah. But then closer to Sedodia, we had to leave the main road, and then it got really, really tricky because it was all sand tracks and gravel tracks. And at the time, I realized I had the wrong car. So the local community had to push and pull a hell of a lot to get me to my destination at the time. But we managed, and then I had the privilege to meet some of the families still with their grandmothers alive. So you see a full tattooed face of this Uptu woman, her traditional attire, and she was in her 80s. So the youngest woman was in the early 80s of this group, and the oldest way above 90 years old. So they have basically stopped tattooing their women like almost 70 years ago, 65, 70 years ago. And I guess the reason is because they were living in the plains. So they were in contact, plains were easily accessible, so they were in contact with more other groups, the Burma, other groups that didn't actually practice tattooing. And they were also easier to access for Buddhist missionaries and Christian missionaries, which both discourage these groups to continue with the facial tattoo practice. So you see here the different generations. Daughter, grandchild, already with a child. None of them is tattooed. So I was able to meet some of these Updu women with full facial tattoos. No patterns in the face. But at the jawline. And I learned over time that the jawline or a variation of a pattern on the jawline is important because it signals that the bearer belongs to a large clan within the group. And each clan has its own signature on the jawline or variation of the tattoo pattern that signals, okay, this is a large clan. And none of the clans could copy another clan's signature. It would have meant war, literally war. So how spread was female facial tattooing? Are there other groups in Myanmar, in Asia Pacific, in the world? That was one of the questions I asked because I started to, got more interested and did a little bit of research. On the chin, I didn't find anything meaningful because there was never any research done. I took the right photo in Nagaland, Myanmar part of Nagaland in 2001. So you see a Naga woman with a tattoo on the forehead and on the chin. So the Naga also used to tattoo their women, but not as elaborated as the chin. The photo on the left side, I found that in a book about the Mekong region. It's by an unknown photographer, but I really, really like that photo as a portrait. And you see a young Lavan or Lavan woman from Vietnam bearing also a tattoo mark across the mouth and on the forehead. So are there other groups in Asia? Yes, in Myanmar, the Naga, but in Asia, not only in Vietnam, ethnic minorities, but the Ainu in Japan, for instance, the Atayal in Taiwan, the Dulong in Yunnan province along the Dulong River. These are also ethnic groups that practice facial tattooing on their women. And that leads me to a very remarkable anthropologist, Anne Wallbank Buckland. She was a British scholar, anthropologist, and ethnologist, and she was the first woman to join the Anthropological Institute of Great Britain Island in 1875 when the institute opened for female membership. And there she presented a paper on tattooing, including this world map on tattooing. So she already did research on different tattooing practices. She distinguishes between gashes, so scarification. It's also a form of tattooing without inserting a pigment under the skin, but by creating scars. Predominant in Africa and in Australia, you could find groups that practice that. And then you see, not sure if you can see it, but you have these areas with the spots. That means that records existed that there were groups that practiced tattooing in the past but stopped it. The lighter shaded areas in America and North America and Europe and also in Asia at the time marked territory or region where groups lived that still practice facial tattooing. And what I marked, these three lines in the red circles, this is where she marked or identified groups that at the time already practiced facial tattooing in the forms of creating marks on the chin of their women. So you can see that it was pretty widespread at the time of her research, which was 1888. And she concluded that this painful mode, so tattoo is a painful, is a painful process, that this painful mode of personal adornment was adopted first at a very early period of human history and was at one time almost universal. So with regard to a very early period of human history, the oldest mummy that bears tattoo marks is actually over 5,000 years old. And it wasn't found in Egypt. It was actually found along the border of Austria and Italy, in Ötztal. And they named the mummy Ötzi. That's the nickname. But it was a hunter from the Copper Age. And it was found by two hikers in 1991. A glacier was retrieving, and they found a naturally mummified body. And that body bore 61 different tattoo marks. And mainly along what we today consider to be meridian lines, acupuncture lines. So these tattoos might have had a medical purpose. But going back to how universal the female tattooing was, I did also some research. You don't have to read all that, but it's just showing how I went about it. So you see in black the region, Asia Pacific, North America, South and Central America, Africa, Middle East, and Europe. White is basically the country or the state, and red is the group, the ethnic group that practiced facial tattooing at one time or another. And I used this data to create my own world map on female facial tattooing based on historical records and vanishing, whereas I consider the chin facial tattooing vanishing because it was practiced until the year 2000. It's actually a first. I've never presented that in public. So here you go. Of course, one has to ask, why? What is it good for? What's the purpose of a facial tattoo? Why did these groups doing it? Or did it? And I like to quote one of the leading tattoo tribal anthropologists, Dr. Lars Krutak from the US. He has done extensive field research, published many books on tattooing, on tribal tattooing, also on tattooing on women. And he concluded that all cultures that practiced or still practice facial tattooing perceive it as beautiful, as beauty enhancing, and also as status elevating rather than defacing. And I think that's a very important one, because there's this myth that's going around in Myanmar, but also being told outside of Myanmar, is that the Chin women started to make themselves ugly to deter the evil Burmese king from raiding their villages and enslaving them. And I think it's a myth, because scientifically and historically there's no evidence that this has ever been the case. What we know from other groups, not only in the region of Asia Pacific but also in other parts of the world, is these are marks of identification. So group affiliation. You see each group has a certain pattern, and it's easy to identify which group the bearer belongs to. So certainly group affiliation. These marks have been applied in rituals and also charged with protective charms. But they certainly have also they're also a protective device against the raw spiritual forces of the environment, because all these groups were animists before. Yeah? And you see some of the tools that I'm going to show in a minute that also show you like fence-like patterns on the eyelids. And this might have been done to protect the person from evil spirits entering the body through the eyes. And then being tattooed at the time of puberty was, for any indigenous woman or any indigenous woman in groups that practice facial tattooing, the most important rite of passage. Yeah? And a completed tattoo signaled the group that this person had managed to transition from one stage of life to the next, from girl to woman. And then had status in the group, rights, but also duties. And last not least, there are groups among the Naga. The Naga are linguistically related to the Chin. Some of the groups of the Naga believe that if they don't wear the traditional tattoos, their ancestors would not recognize them in the afterlife. And it might well be that the Chin groups followed a similar belief. So these were not only marks for life, and this is, by the way, the title of my presentation and also the title of my book. These ancient marks were not only marks for life, not only marks for identity and belief, but also marks that could be carried into the afterlife. Last but not least, let me take you to Rakhine State and the Lemhu River, where you have groups settled, which I call the Lemhu River Chin. I traveled overland several times to Rakhine and to Mraou, but it's easier to fly actually to Sidway and then travel up the beautiful Kaladan River that at some point you get into the Mraou River. And once there, I had to organize my expeditions because that is what it actually was. So I had to assemble a crew, a captain, boatman, a cook, and then we basically shippered up and down the Lemhu River and also tributaries. I slept on the boat or in makeshift monasteries. And this was a very remarkable evening, I have to say, staying with this monk, because in the evening he showed me his treasure. These were old silver coins from Portugal and Spain, gemstones, and the necklace was tiger teeth about 10 centimeters long. I slept in bamboo huts that were towering over the Lemhu River with a $1 million view. So it was a beautiful landscape, and in this beautiful landscape there were villages where you also find Chin women with the most elaborate and most beautiful tattoos. What you see here is a Leto Chin woman, and you see how even the tattoo has been applied, also in terms of color. You actually see it better on the, it's crisper on the screens, but you can see the evenness of the tattoo. And that means one session. The women had to go through that in one session. You don't see any breaks. It was done in one session, several hours. You don't need an illustration to see the beauty of that tattoo, but you might, it needs them for some other of the images. This was the youngest Chin woman, Leto Chin woman, from a different Leto group with a facial tattoo. When I met her in 2005, she was 17 years old. She was tattooed when she was 12 years, in the year 2000, 5 years earlier. She's the youngest woman on record. I've not met any younger woman with a facial tattoo, nor did I came across any evidence that tattooing was then still practiced after the year 2000. And the reason is, even in the remotest village, you could find a Buddhist or a Christian missionary. And they discouraged the practice of facial tattooing. This group has the most intricate and beautiful tattoo I've seen. It's amazing. I wish I could tell you what it means or what it stands for. But even the Chin themselves didn't know. Even in colonial literature, you don't find any indication of that the Chin had any knowledge more than 250 years ago what these tattoos meaning. And I heard the same answer that some of the British colonialists heard like 250 years ago, that we don't know, we do it since time immemorial. So even hundreds of years ago, the Chin themselves didn't know the meaning. I met one tattoo artist, a female tattoo artist, and she basically, she basically told me the symbol on the forehead, that represents the sun. So you see that nicely, the circle, and the circle was either painted or with a coin or a bamboo ring, and it represents the sun. You see the radiation around it. That's another Leto Chin group. You don't see the difference here because you can't hardly see the difference between pattern and wrinkle. Still a beautiful tattoo and a beautiful old woman. That's the illustration. It shows you denser lines, the sun symbol on the forehead. It also, she has a certain pattern on the jawline. Others had a different pattern on the jawline. Again, represents a different clan. So another group is the Sungtu Chin. What you see here is a dark face. You can't hardly see the pattern, but you see a pattern along the jaw line. Nice to see that this woman still has her original silver ear plug, because a lot of them have already, when I met them, traded their silver jewelry. And that's because you have traders from Yangon coming up the rivers, traveling to these remote villages with pots and pans and mirrors, and literally selling pots and pans and mirrors and household goods to these Chin women. And they have no money in these villages. They barter, so they traded their silver jewelry very often for mirrors and pots and pans. The traders took the silver back to Yangon. Nicer pieces they sold on spot market to antique dealers. Others, they were melted, and then new contemporary jewelry was created out of that silver. So it's very difficult to find any of the original silver in these villages. Also an amazing tattoo, if you look at the illustration, and trust me, it took me 2 years to illustrate all these tattoos and really look, find out the details and look at all the photos I took to really reconstruct these tattoos. Very powerful sun symbol on the forehead. That's a different group altogether, also a group that was never mentioned in literature. The tattoo here looks very raw. This group also, the youngest woman was in their 80s. I've met only 3 between 80 and 90 years old. It's a bit difficult to see the beauty of the tattoo. But you can imagine a young woman with this type of design. Again, you see the sun symbol, and this is very special because you see a flame protruding out of the sun. So there might well be a celestial event in the past, that inspired that group for this pattern. And the higher up I went on the Lemya River, the more the tattoo changes. That was, it's another group actually called Maganchin. And what you see is a lot of dots and some vertical and horizontal lines. And these are typical the pattern that is used up in the Chin Hills. So I would say that is a mix between Chin Hill and Lemya River, maybe the missing link even. What you see here is quadrants filled with dots, and probably compared to the other southern Chin Hill tattoos, are more elaborated in terms of its design. So altogether, I came across 13 patterns. You can always say 14 years, 13 patterns, so one new pattern a year, if you take the average. These are the 6 patterns, the main patterns I saw at the Lemya River. None of them really ever illustrated or recorded well. And you might ask yourself, how did you do it? You went to these villages and then? Well, I had helpers, meaning I had helpers, I had local guides. Sometimes I had tour guides, one that spoke or could translate from Burmese to English. And then in the villages, someone who could spoke the Chin dialect and Burmese, and then it was translated. So I'm sure a lot of knowledge was also lost in translation. But I also help us to block the light and fill in the light. I used no digital film. It was all no digital. It was all film. Ilford or Velvia from Fuji. I used a Hasselblad, so a medium format camera with fixed lenses and converters. So this is an in situ photo, and this is the image that I created out of that. Right? So I had my own vision, and it took me a long while to create my own visual language. Basically, visual language, how I wanted to tell the story of beauty and dignity. That is another in situ typical scene. I had a lot of people around. Sometimes I had to cordon off where I was working. A lot of people tried to give advice. And I made it clear, no, stay out, because it's a very intimate moment. It's a moment between me and the subject, and I hope you can see that in some of the images. And there was only non-verbal communication, and it required a lot of trust, of course. And I built that over time. It was not that I just walked in, waltzed in, and took the photos. No, some of the villages I went 2 or 3 times, sometimes even more. And over time, I built that trust. And for every image you see here on the wall, I probably wasted maybe 60, 70 images, or negatives or positives, right? Sometimes I cried. I was so frustrated because I knew what I wanted to tell and how I wanted to tell it, but I couldn't capture the moment or the image. And also, it was a creative process, and I had to get into the creative process. And I have to be honest, I mean, the most of the time of the year I was sitting on a desk working for, a multinational. And then once a year or twice, I ventured into the wild and tried to create great photos. And that didn't work well in the first days. But at some point, I got into that flow moment, and then I had 2 or 3 days where I created really images that, from my perspective, told the story. This is the image that was created out of that situation there. I used a lot of Polaroid. And Polaroid was always the icebreaker, right? Because in the villages, they've never seen something permanent as a photo. They looked in the mirror they bought from Indian traders that came up the river, or on the water surface, and it reflected their image. So I started to take Polaroids, give it to them, and that broke the ice. And then I was able to say, okay, and now I'll take my image with a different camera. That's how I did it. I brought presents, lunges, food, medicine that could be used. So it was also an inner journey, actually, to go from that first photo, which is certainly interesting, then to create photos that told the stories I wanted to tell. Showing the beauty and the dignity of these women. If I manage to do so, I don't know. You'll be the judges. So let me summarize here. So the team were not the only one that practiced facial tattooing in the past, but they probably have the most elaborated tattoos. They're one of the least researched ethnic groups on the planet, still, until today. I came across 13 main patterns, and these are beautiful people, and they deserve peace, like anyone else in Myanmar. What's next after this? What's another project, right? I was thinking of that as well, and it was a tough one, but luckily a friend called me and said, hey, I know a few old guys with leg tattoos. Would you mind to go and travel to Cayenne State and take a few photos? I said, sure. And there it was. Another photo project which I started already a while ago, but which I, continued, and I just published a book in January. No ISBN, no international distribution, only available in Yangon. But it's a book that captures some traditional leg tattoos and provided some context. And I do that because I think in Myanmar you still need to capture these ancient traditions, these vanishing traditions, and disseminate the knowledge. This is one way. It's Burmese in English, and I hope that at some point people will really appreciate this type of documentation, because like in other countries where you had ethnic groups that practice facial, or not only facial, but also these ancient tattoo practices, you will see a revival. You already see that in other parts of the world, among the Maori in New Zealand, the Inuit, or Native Americans, and they have tattoo traditions, and it's young people that start to discover these traditions and apply these marks, because they want to be showing that they're proud of their tradition, and it also shows affiliation. I belong to that ethnic group. So anyway, I think that's the end of my talk, actually. I have a few other books which you're happy to have a look at or to buy. They're all out of print. I brought those copies that I still have for sales. Once they're sold, that's it. So thank you, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Before we turn to Tom, I might ask you, are you saying that it's all ground to a halt as a result of the conflict, or that it's phased out as a practice in Chin State? Or do you think the conflict has accelerated the end of this kind of tradition?
The thing is, the practice was discontinued about 20 years ago. However, what I saw is that young people started to paint the tattoos on their face. So I would say that is already an indication of revival. So at these festivals, you saw more and more young people painting tattoos on their face. Yeah. So, give it another 5 to 10 years, they would probably have started the practice under maybe a different government. Because remember, the ban of facial tattooing was, the ban that banned facial tattooing was never lifted. So they couldn't actually, without clashing with the official, with the
authorities.
The authorities, yeah, thank you, exactly. But what happens is they can't celebrate these festivals anymore, yeah, with gathering. So certain practices cannot be performed. And I guess the longer the conflict lasts, the more it's likely that certain knowledge is being lost and cannot be documented.
Right. Thank you. Okay, we might save some questions till later, but if you want to ask a quick one, sure, you can. Can you speak up? Normally we would have it. Oh, you don't know? Do you want to save it till later, or do you want to do it now?
Yeah, please ask. Come on, shoot.
Can you speak up and identify yourself?
Yeah, 2 questions. My name is
2. Okay, all right. Hang on. Can we get the microphone, because we actually have this on video? Thanks. And
Good evening, everyone. Okay, perfect. So yeah, 2 quick questions.
Sure.
Quick one.
And
don't
you
worry.
are?
Aaron, thanks. The first one is: have you experienced or come across basically women that didn't want this tattoo? So was it like a conscribed tattoo? You said at like adolescence age, right? And second question: why only women, not men as well?
Well, let me start with the second one. It's easier to answer.
And can you speak up a bit, Jens?
Yeah.
The microphone's not great.
Maybe I just... Is that okay?
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay.
I should have told
Well, I hope you
to
heard
do
what I
that
was telling before.
Yeah.
Should I do it again, or...?
No. It's all right.
Okay.
Sorry, we really should have asked you to do that before.
Yeah, okay. So the Chin men have no tattoos. So in that group, and I can only speak for that group in particular, only women were tattooed. Full stop. Did I came across women that said, oh, no, I didn't want to be tattooed? No, definitely not, because it was part of their culture. And there was actually one interesting woman, one of the Updu Chin women with the totally black tattoos, an older woman. She was in her 80s. And she told me that her father didn't want her to get tattooed. But she said, all my girlfriends were tattooed, so I ran away from home and got the tattoo. That is rock and roll, right? This was defined.
And those black ones are very painful.
Yes, so that was
Extremely.
a form of protest. She wanted to belong to the in group, so she ran away from home, got her tattoo, and then once she got it, she came back. Yeah.
And do you think the revival might be a sign of rebellion?
It could potentially be, but also of being proud of the roots, the cultural roots, their own cultural roots, and the affiliation to the group.
Okay, thank you. So we'll take more questions later. I just want to turn now to Tom, whose book, Sacred Skin, is really an exceptional look at Thailand's spiritual tattoos. Actually, I don't think I've ever seen a tattooed face of a woman in Thailand. Does that exist? And sorry, I'm throwing you. You've probably prepared some remarks.
Hi everyone, hello.
Is that microphone working?
1, 2,
Yes.
Sadika.
Yeah.
Hello
Carry
everybody.
on.
Thanks for having me, Gwen, and thanks to the FCCT for having me. Yes, lots of Thai women and men get their faces tattooed with sakyant, with the spirit tattoos, but they usually use oil, so you can't see the tattoo.
Invisible tattoos.
For women, because there's a stigma attached to getting very visible tattoos in Thailand, but also because it's in the face, and this is a modern country, and there might be prejudice against somebody walking around with a face tattoo. So people use oil, and the tattooist it's the same process. He will apply the tattoo with oil, and then if the person who is tattooed happens to get angry or flustered at a later time, the tattoo sometimes becomes visible on the forehead or when they blush. So that's when you can see the tattoo.
Oh, how
There are many, many Thais, many women and men who have sakyant on their faces, yes.
fascinating.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about
Yes,
taboo,
please.
because in the West, or the way Aaron asked the questions about whether the girls mind getting the tattoo, that's a very Western question, and as Jens explained, it would never occur to those girls to question that. But in the West, of course, a face tattoo is still scandalous or can be seen like that. So I wanted to tell all of you that on Lazada you can buy a complete tattoo kit for 900 baht and you can start tattooing the faces of your best friends tomorrow. I don't think there's a law against it in Thailand. In shops, in commercial tattoo shops in the West, there is a law against making face tattoos. Certainly in Germany, you can't just walk into the shop and get your face tattooed.
Really?
That said, there are more and more people in the tattoo industry around the world, and people who are close to that industry who are getting their faces tattooed. I have a friend who's had his eyeballs tattooed.
Eyeballs?
Yes. Yeah, that also exists. There's only 2 or 3 tattooists in the world that actually do that, and of course there's no long-term research what that does to the eyes. So this guy has completely black eyes. He looks like a zombie, and he's only 25, so most of the time he wears sunglasses, not surprisingly. Anyway, I wanted to talk about this idea of taboo in tattooing, because that's the reaction when you first look at Jens's pictures that many people will have. They wonder, what did that do to those women? How old were they when it was done? In what context it was done? And I wanted to say that I've worked a lot with tattoo communities, indigenous tattoo communities around the world since the 90s. I think the first face tattoos I saw were in the very early 90s amongst the Berbers in Morocco. That was women. Then the Kalash in Pakistan in the 90s, that was also girls. And so I'll tell you a little story about that. I was in 1998 in the Kalash valleys in northwest Pakistan on the border to Afghanistan. I was doing some research there for the British Library into indigenous music, nothing to do with tattoos at all. And the Kalash people, they're a minority of at that time, about 6,000 people. They lived in 3 different valleys, and they claimed to be descendants of Alexander the Great. Many of them had blue eyes and blonde hair, and they were the only animist people in Pakistan, so there was like 6,000 animists amongst 160 million Muslims. So the pressure on these people was quite considerable. They couldn't leave their valleys, and if they wanted a real job and work in the Pakistan economy, they would have to renounce their animist faith and convert to Islam, which some of them did. And that was a big bone of contention in the 1990s when I worked in that community. And I do remember arriving, and the women, they would wear these cotton headdresses, and they would wear bead necklaces with thousands of beads, so quite heavy. And the older the women got, the more necklaces. They would be in different colors, and they would be very neatly arranged in a kind of aesthetic way. And some of the very young girls at that time had face tattoos. They usually had dots and crosses on their foreheads, and then dots on their cheeks and dots on their chins. I think the youngest girls I saw then were maybe 10, 12 years old. And so on the first day when I arrived, I met in one of the valleys, I met the village headman, and we sat in a garden, and I think we drank some tea together, and I introduced myself and tried to explain what I was doing there, recording their music, which in indigenous communities is quite strange for them, because the music is usually part of ritual. It's not entertainment, it's not artists, but it's a community thing. So they were surprised that a European would come and would want to sit through days and days of festivals and record drumming, etc. So I tried to show him my recording equipment and how I was doing this, and explain why I was doing this. And as we were talking, 2 or 3 ladies entered this garden, and they were all wearing burqas. So they were completely covered. And because there are 6,000 Kalash, but in all these Kalash villages there are also Muslim people living, and there are Muslim tourists sometimes, and there are also, as I said, the converts. For example, if a Kalash wants to become a policeman, or there was a few who went to university, they all had to convert. So I didn't think much of it, and just sat there and I watched these 3 ladies walking past. I didn't say anything. I kept talking to the headman, and then suddenly one of those ladies branched off from the other 2 and came towards me. I was sitting on a chair like this, and before I could move at all, she jumped on top of me. So I was in northwest Pakistan, 20 miles short of the Afghani border, and there's a woman in a burqa who's just jumped on top of me and just sits there laughing her head off underneath the burqa. And what the hell am I going to do now? And then she took her headdress off, and of course there was a Kalash woman underneath with face tattoos. And that was the first time I saw their face tattoos. And she was laughing at me and going, "Ha, that shocked you, didn't it?" And for a moment I didn't know what was going on. I was pretty scared. And so that was the first time, because she was obviously very close to me, and it was the first time I really perceived those tattoos, which were much more modest in size. But it was also the first time when being so directly confronted with it, I thought about this concept that we Europeans, as Farang, we have a deep historic prejudice against face tattoos. So when we, all of us lived in the West, maybe most of us at some point, we were in the supermarket and we saw the guy with the spider web, right? There's always this guy with the spider web who walks around. You've got in Australia, in Germany, in England, he exists. Maybe not now, but when I was young in the 90s, there was the guy with the spider web. The unfortunate who was silly enough to, in those days, to get his face tattooed, and he never got a job, of course. He worked as a car park attendant or something. That was it. He wasn't going to go any further in life because there was this very strong taboo. And this was very, as I said, this has historic connotations. So we were talking yesterday, me and Jens, about the British colonial rule in Myanmar and in India. And the British, during the colonial rule, they tattooed more than 500,000 people themselves, criminals that they convicted in the courts during the Raj. And what they did when they convicted somebody of, let's say, murder or rape or serious theft, and they would, besides either executing them or throwing them in jail, they would also put the nature of the crime on their forehead in the local language of whatever that person, whatever community that person was coming from. And they did this to hundreds of thousands of people. So, of course, this was abusive. Then again, these people were all criminals, but they were never going to walk away from their crime again because they would be marked for the rest of their lives. So there was no question of, in today's sense, that you sit off your time and then the crime is done. But it also kind of alludes to the way that we have always perceived facial tattoos, which is as disfiguring, basically. And as I said earlier, that is changing within the commercial tattoo industry, because nowadays everybody's tattooed. Half of you are probably tattooed. And if not, you can buy the Lazada set tomorrow for 900 baht.
Are you taking a commission on this Lazada tattoo kit?
I'm opening doors, Gwen. I'm opening doors. Imagine how life could change immediately. Perception in the SkyTrain would be completely different. Anyway, I found in our conversation yesterday when I first met Jens, I found that very interesting, because it is, if I showed these pictures to my mother or to most of my friends, they would probably ask a similar question to the one that Erin posed earlier, which is about, is this voluntary? And do they have any say? And I would say to this goes far beyond the issue of tattoos. In all indigenous groups and in local cultures, there are practices that in our global dominant culture may seem strange. A very good example is there's this lady in Kathmandu called the Kumari, and she's a goddess, and she lives in a palace, and the first time she menstruates, she's no longer a goddess, and she's kind of shunted off and gets a government pension, and no one wants to marry her. But prior to that, when she's an adolescent young girl, thousands of people come to her for advice. And her feet never touch the ground. Everything is done for her. And the selection process for finding this girl is incredibly arcane. She has to go through quite strange tests where they put her in a dark room with a chopped off buffalo head, and if she freaks out, she's clearly not the goddess, etc. So there are some NGOs who are complaining about this, and they're saying this is barbaric and old-fashioned and it doesn't belong in our modern world. And this is just one example, and I think this is one example that I've come across. I've met 2 or 3 of these Kumaris, but I think there are probably thousands and thousands of traditions that in indigenous cultures or in cultures that have not been particularly touched by globalization and development, where if we look at them initially we go, I wouldn't do that, or that's not quite right, or did they really have the right to do that to that person, or did that person have any say in it? Did the rights of the individual, were they observed? And what I would say to that is, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. It doesn't matter for the Chin, and it doesn't matter in any of these other situations either, unless, and we also talked about this yesterday, unless there's clearly a crime being committed, or unless there's something that is, we were talking yesterday about genital mutilation, which is still being practiced in a handful of African countries, and in Indonesia, I believe. Mm-hmm. And there is, in some of these countries, a law process against it, and yet it survives as a tradition. And that, we both agreed, is clearly, there is a thin line. But at the end of the day, it is my belief, perhaps not his, but that it's for that culture to sort that out. And it's not for us white people to go there and say, well, that looks awful, stop it. That over there looks awful. So all the tattoo cultures that I've had contact with, whether it was men or women who were getting tattooed in the face. In Borneo, it was men. Amongst the Kalash in Pakistan, it was women. Amongst the Berbers in Morocco, it was women. I'm just trying to think. I've also lived with the Ifugao in the Philippines in the mid-90s. I think also only women were tattooed in the face. So I would personally say I spent a lot of time in all of those cultures, 2 months, 3 months at a time, and I never got the impression that that these people even had the thought that this might be abusive in any way, because it was so deeply integrated into the general culture and rituals of that community that was passed orally from generation to generation. And as far as the face tattoos are concerned, we found out that the methods with which they were done in a social context were very different. So Jens was telling me that amongst the Chin there was male and female tattooists.
For some groups only. Some groups are only female,
right.
Some groups were both.
And they were local
female.
people.
Sorry?
And they were locals, you were saying yesterday. They were part of the community.
Yes, there were no traveling tattooists that could apply different pattern. This was not the case.
And I spent some time in 2016 with the Kond, which is a tribal group, an Adivasi group in eastern India, in Odisha, and many of the women there are tattooed. The youngest one I found in 2016 was 28, so the tradition had also ended. She was also in her teenage years when she was tattooed. And those people told me that they were specific women who did the tattoos, but they did not belong to the community. They went from village to village, maybe like wandering minstrels in the Middle Ages in Europe. And they were hired by the villages for money to apply those tattoos. So I guess the village chief and the parents decided, okay, you, and you are ready, and when the lady comes into town the next time, you're all gonna get marked. So from group to group there are vast differences. Why? And when I asked the Kalash girl who sat on me with the burqa, I said, what's with the tattoos? She said, it's my makeup. It's my makeup. It's how I feel beautiful. So there was no ritualistic context at all. It was purely aesthetic for her. But all the young girls had those tattoos.
The Chin also perceive it as beautiful. None of them
course,
perceive
yeah,
it as
so
ugly. Yeah.
the universality that Jens was touching on earlier, this is what I also experienced all across Asia with many, many different cultures who either do body or face tattoos. It's never perceived as ugly. It's always perceived either as purely ritualistic, in which case the question of ugly or not ugly doesn't even come into it, or it's like with the Kalash lady or with the Chin, it's something that the girls, or the men for that matter, they see themselves as beautiful.
I think another way to look at it is if beauty parlors would exist in the tribal world and there would be magazines, the covers would look very, very different from the ones in the Western beauty parlors, that's for sure.
Right.
So, one sentence more.
No, yeah, carry on.
The irony of all of this is, as Jens has pointed out, and most of the cultures where I've seen face tattoos, they are dying out. And the reason for that is a combination of government pushing for assimilation in various countries and these things. Because once the kids have got these things, they don't care about nothing of their own culture anymore, and they just want to crawl in there and never come out again. So development, infrastructure, connectivity, all of those things flatten the world.
Religion?
I'm sorry?
Religious concepts.
And dominant religious concepts like the big religions that wipe out the animism, yes. And ironically, at the same time, in our culture, tattooing has completely exploded. It's no longer a big deal since David Beckham to have like a really ugly full sleeve tattoo. You can do almost whatever you want, yet face tattoos still have a little bit of a taboo in the West, although they're also becoming more common. And so just to finish off, what I find interesting is we are very judgmental about indigenous cultures when they transform their bodies in some ways. And yet, in our culture, this has become a multi-million, perhaps billion-dollar business. On the positive side of all that, when those two strains come together, for example, amongst the Dayak in Borneo, there are young people who resurrect the knowledge of their grandparents, which was wiped out by Christian missionaries who told them their tattoos were ugly, stop cutting the heads off your neighbors, and behave yourselves. And so all their knowledge went, and now the children, the people who are like 20, 25 now, they're digging. They're actively digging. They're looking through old, on the internet, of course, they're looking through old chronologies, and if they're really resourceful, they go to libraries, and then they try to recreate the instruments that their grandparents were using, and learn the patterns that their grandparents used, and then they go to tattoo conventions around the world and sell that, and apply those tattoos onto us, white people. So there are Westerners now who have Dayak peacocks on their chins, and so I think there's a certain historic irony there. It's good for these kids to revive their parents' tattoo culture, and the tattoo culture mostly went because of us, because we went there as missionaries, or we went there with modern development, and now these kids are using that against us in a way by coming to us and charging us a lot of money to deface our faces with their old patterns, but for money, and I find that remarkable. So thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think to just bring it back to Thailand, a lot of what we've talked about are kind of traditional and tribal. So you're saying, like, young people don't even think about it, it's part of the tribe tradition, whereas in Thailand there isn't the sort of strong tribal system. You're not tattooed because of your tribe. So where does that fit in terms of also the invisible oil tattoos or even all the other tattoos? It seems to be much more voluntary and actually a direct and individual choice, right? You're not doing it because your community expects it.
No.
Or are you?
As far as, in Thailand you have sakyan, which is the spirit tattoos, and then you have commercial tattooing like everywhere else.
But these are voluntary, right?
Of course, and they're all done to grown-ups. The children don't get sakyan. This is adults. And if you go to a sakyan parlor or you go to Wat Bang Pra in Nakhon Chai Si, this is the best known.
Do you want to explain what sakyanta are for
okay,
people who haven't read your book?
For the sakyanta are Thai spirit tattoos. So they're tattoos that are at the crossroads between Buddhism and animism. And they've been applied in some Thai monasteries for a long, long time. We don't really know exactly how long, but there are historical sources that stretch back before World War II. The best known temple that applies those tattoos, where monks apply those tattoos to their devotees, is in Nakhon Chai Si, which is maybe 80 kilometers west of Bangkok, not very far. And actually yesterday was their Wai Kru Day, which means honor the teacher. This is a once a year festival where all the monks in the monastery, as well as many outside ajahns, come and tattoo thousands of devotees. So it's if you have a chance to go next year, it's quite a spectacle. There'll be about 15,000 people there, and everything revolves around these sacred tattoos. So there's definitely been a renaissance of those, and since Angelina Jolie got interested in them 20 years ago, there's also been an increasing interest for those tattoos in the West. They're not applied with machines, they're applied with a long steel needle. And as I said earlier, because there's still a stigma in Thailand for women to be heavily tattooed, the ajahns usually suggest to female devotees to have the tattoo done in oil. And many of them agree, because this is the reason why Thai people get sakyan is for spiritual reasons. It's to the tattoos are said to have protective powers, and they come with mantras that are given by the ajahns who apply the tattoos. So some tattoos may the wearer may hope to do better business deals, or attract a member of the opposite sex, or do well gambling, or whatever. There could be, or for personal protection, or for good health. There are many, many different tattoos that you apply for many different reasons. And there's really no aesthetic aspect. The main thing is the spell or the protection that comes with the tattoo, and who applies it, and where on the body it's applied, visibly, not often on the face, and then you wear it either visibly or invisibly. But even the people who have those tattoos visibly, they don't show them off to their friends. It's not, you have them under your shirt, and maybe your friend will never see them. So, for example, I have a friend called Nung, and he has his chest and his skull tattooed with sakyant. And when he got married, he was too scared to tell his wife. So at that time, he had a full head of hair. Now he's bald. But so the first time his wife realized he had magical tattoos all over his body was after the marriage, and she was quite shocked and hadn't expected that. As I said, now he's lost most of his hair, so the whole street can see that his head is tattooed. So what I'm saying is, the sakyan, it's never about aesthetics. It's not about what it looks like, and it's not about who sees it. It's about the protection that the wearer gets from it. And therefore, whether it's in oil or ink doesn't really make much difference.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much. We've got time for a couple of questions, if anyone has any. The microphone's over there. Please keep them short and identify yourself. Do we have a question there? No. Okay. All right. Well, if there's no questions, I would suggest that you might want to look at the books or talk to either of our excellent speakers, and I'd really like to...
Yeah, and thank you very much.
Yes, if there's anything more you'd like to say...
This is the first time some of my work is here exhibited in Thailand, and for that I'm very grateful to the FCCT, to you, Quinn. I'd like to thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's great to have these. This will be on display for the next month, at least through April, as I said. So if you have friends who might be interested to see these stunning images, and we'll keep the books for sale as well for the month. So please spread the word. And Jens, you might want to end with any other comment on your next projects, as it's so difficult now to travel around Myanmar, particularly in those areas that you have been active before, like Chin and also now Karenni, as you well know. So what, are you actually going to continue doing some work on indigenous tattoo culture, or?
Well, less so on indigenous tattoo culture, yeah, because it's very difficult now to go to any of the ethnic states in Myanmar. But what I start to do is, when I cycle through the streets of Yangon, to look out for people with tattoos, and some I'll see applying or having applied mythical figurines, or tattoos that are either linked to tribal tattoo culture, or they are special. So I'll stop, ask them if I can take a photo, take it, and then I travel on. That's to compensate what I can't do now in the ethnic states, to be honest. So that might lead to a body of work at some point in time as well, who knows. I call it the Myanmar's untold tattoo stories.
Well, I hope we see some of those. Maybe next year we could have...
Well, we could do the leg tattoos.
Yeah, leg tattoos,
at some point,
yes,
yeah.
Absolutely.
But thank you again, Gwen. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you, and stick around if you like. The bar will be open, and thank you to both of you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great talk.
Get tattooed, everyone.
Let's have a little photo.